We are coming back, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently, I'm going to have to try and do some of that poetry again. So the gallery tells me that we're now live. So pretend there was no poetry, all right? 3, 2, 1, you're back in the room. Again, look into the wobbly eyes. Look into the wobbly eyes. So Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. There is a point to this, by the way. England hath need of thee. She is a fen of stagnant waters, altar, sword, and pen. Fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower have forfeited their ancient English dower of inward howardness. Now, that is very much linked to what we're talking about, which is poetry. That, the reason I pick that is London Sonnet 1802. And it's what I describe as golden age theory, right? So many people look back and think, you know, things always used to be great in the 70s. Yeah, what, casual racism, smoggy cars, cigarettes everywhere. And I'm a great believer, as today shows, that progress is all around us. Now, in a short while, we'll be having a panel discussion on neurodiversity, a term that should apply to all of us, right? Because we're all different. But I think for the second, the reason I mention both the importance of progress and poetry is I would like us to take a few moments to lead into our panel discussion to look at this wonderful film from BBC Scotland, and it's called Flipping the Script on Dyslexia.
I am dyslexic. I'm getting nowhere because it's hard for me to believe that days are getting better. I am the victim. I don't believe that it's just a label. My dyslexia is what's holding me back from success. Listening to the world that tells me I can't believe or to achieve greatness, I should never believe in myself. I should always doubt myself. I will never reach my dreams. I wrote my own story to stay negative. Society shouts you can't be anybody and go anywhere. People tell me you're just plain stupid and never think that you're clever and smart. It would be obvious that you can't read and write. You'd be stupid to think there is a future for you. There is a future for you. You'd be stupid to think you can't read and write. It would be obvious that you're clever and smart and never think that you're just plain stupid. People tell me, be anybody and go anywhere. Society shouts you can't. Stay negative. I wrote my own story to reach my dreams. I will never doubt myself. I should always believe in myself. To achieve greatness, I should never listen to the world that tells me I can't believe or would hold me back from success. My dyslexia it's just a label. I don't believe that. I am the victim. Days are getting better. It's hard for me to believe that I'm getting nowhere because I am dyslexic.
Flipping the script on dyslexia from our colleagues at BBC Scotland. Again, many may not be here, but we'll have a round of applause for that. Keeps your hands warm anyway. And that's the topic that we're going to be discussing next. We encourage, in our next panel session, plenty of questions, but any that you don't fit in, just a quick mention ahead for the end of the session later today. There is a networking session in the Media Cafe, and I'm reliably informed there might be a glass of wine or two if that's your thing. So can I please, ladies and gentlemen, ask you to put your hands together from Enigma for Xanthi Palmer.
Thank you so much for that introduction and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you find today's panel really useful. So my name's Xanthi. I'm a broadcast journalist and I have dyspraxia, which for those who don't know, it's a neurological condition that affects your coordination basically, physically and mentally. I think that's probably the best way to describe it in as few words as possible, but I'm sure I'll explain a bit more about it throughout this panel. So that makes me neurodiverse, which is exactly what this panel is all about. I'm 5'4", I've got brown curly hair, and I'm wearing a black dress and some white trainers today. And I want to introduce you to my wonderful panellists. I'm going to start with Onyinye.
Hi everyone, my name is Onyinye Udoporo. I am a jack of all trades, but first and foremost, I'm a black neurodivergent woman. Specifically, I am dyslexic. I started my first business age 12 and have gone on to set up a second business, which is why I'm sitting in front of you today as a neurodiversity consultant. I'm also the author of the book Dyslexia and Me, How to Survive and Thrive If You're Neurodivergent, which was published last year. I am wearing an ivory blouse and lime green trousers, and brown shoes, and I'm 24 years old. And I'm a black woman with blonde braids at the moment. It's ever changing.
Thank you. And Theo, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Theo Smith. I'm early 40s, about 6'2". I'm wearing a grey jacket, a pork pie black hat. These hats are always stuck to my head. And I have bright trainers. And I was told before I left house, I was asked, should I have the tongues out or in? And I was told, you're wearing bright yellow and purple trainers. Do you really think it matters whether you have them in or out? So I'm a neurodiversity advocate. I wrote a book with the incredible Professor Amanda Kirby, Neurodiversity at Work. We won Business Book of the Year award for diversity, inclusion, and belonging last year. I'm the podcast host of Neurodiversity with Theo Smith. And I'm a recruitment expert, talent acquisition, HR kind of bod by trade.
Wonderful. And our final panellist is Ginny. Ginny, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Santhi. I'm Ginny Russell. I'm a professor of sociology from the University of Exeter, and I used to work at the BBC, but I got kicked out for being, well, I don't know, actually, being a bit rubbish probably, but not being quite what they wanted me to be, which is where I'm at today, because I'm kind of interested in neurodiversity from an academic point of view, and where we locate disability, whether we locate it in individuals or whether we locate disability in society, and our environment, our work environment specifically. So I've been an academic now since 2008, and I've published about 50 articles and also written a book on autism, which is my area of study. I study autism and ADHD. Oh, and I'm wearing a dress with spots and a stripy shirt, and I'm 57, and I've got short hair, and I've got sandals on with the toes poking out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for introducing yourself. So throughout this panel, we're going to try and help you understand a little bit more about what neurodiversity is, because I feel like we hear that word a lot nowadays, but people are like, what does it actually mean? I often find when I say, oh, I've got dyspraxia, people say, oh, do you mean dyslexia? I'm like, no, that's something different. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll get a bit of an idea as to what neurodiversity actually means. It's quite an umbrella term that covers lots of things. And I think the most important thing is to sort of empower you to feel a bit more confident talking about it, because it can be a bit awkward if you don't want to assume things and you don't want to ask things. But then if we don't ask, we don't learn. So hopefully by the end of this, you feel like you know a bit more and you can maybe help your colleagues out a bit more and get the best out of each other, which I think is what we all want when we come to work, really. So we're going to split it up into sort of two parts, mainly, and starting off with actually trying to understand what neurodiversity is. So I'm going to go to you, Ginny, for this. Can you explain, it's a big question, but how can we understand what neurodiversity actually means? What is it?
Well, it literally means just the variation in human brains and the kind of differences that we have in behaviour and characteristics and traits, human traits. There's also various categories within neurodiversity. So often people think about diagnosed conditions, neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's, a whole range of conditions that are associated with neurological differences that have been scientifically compared between people with those conditions and people without, to figure out how brains are different, wiring and so on, physiologically and also anatomically. So there are people who would call themselves neurodiverse or neurodivergent. Neurodivergent's actually the more accurate term. And this movement it originates from the autism rights movement in the 1990s. People like Jim Sinclair, very famous writer in this area, who started arguing that the medical model, which uses a diagnosis and a diagnostic framework, thinks about deficits in people, thinks about how there's always something wrong with people who have these kind of conditions and tries to treat them, whereas the neurodiversity movement is trying to locate that in society and say society is actually disabling and valuing the kind of whole range of wonderful things that people with those kinds of differences can bring to the table, as well as appreciating that people have challenges as well.
So we now understand it's just that our brains are basically wired differently, which is, I think, the best, most accessible way to explain it. But not to get too scientific, but how How does that happen? How are our brains somehow wired differently when we're born? How does that work?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of genetic predisposition in a lot of these conditions, and that's been also, a lot of these things run through families. But there's also various different studies that have shown there are environmental triggers as well, and also people, when they're, for example, in development, there might be things that, for example, infections during pregnancy that might trigger neurological differences. So there's a very biological understanding of neurodiversity in that way. But neurodiversity isn't just about biology, it's also about the interaction between people and their environment, and how people best function within a certain environment. So people who have maybe predispositions to differences, such as dyslexia, struggle with English, for example, are only going to struggle with English. They might be, if they're in an English-speaking country, they might be fine if they're doing computer programming, for example, in a different language. So what I'm trying to say is that although those neurological things might be biological, whether or not they're salient, it depends on the environment that somebody's in, and that in particular is the work environment. So, for example, we take dyslexia, as we just had the film, and we've talked that you've got dyslexia, you're dyslexic. So, for example, at my university, we're thinking about maybe changing the working environment to suit dyslexic people more. For example, instead of, if you're doing a PhD, having to write a thesis, you might just do programming as a practice and produce a computer program that would support your PhD instead of having to write a 60,000 word thesis. So that's what we're trying to push, is this idea that, okay, so there are biological factors, but it's not just about that, it's about the fit and what's salient, what society values, and often what society values is around productivity and making money, unfortunately. So, yeah, I'll stop talking now.
No, I think that's such a good point, because I feel like I didn't notice that I was different until it's only very certain situations where I'm like, oh, I don't fit in here. And then that's kind of how you notice it. So that's a really good point. And then I guess bringing that, talking of environments, bringing it back to the workplace, you kind of mentioned that, it's about getting the best out of people and maybe introducing things that will benefit people and, as I say, get the best out of them. But how, for people here today that maybe don't really know much about neurodiversity, how would you even know without somebody telling you that they're neurodiverse? What should we be mindful of in terms of our colleagues?
Well, I mean, maybe I should ask the other two to pitch in at there, because I think they probably both have a lot to say on that. I mean, I could continue, but I'd quite like to hear from them too, in terms of, yeah.
Well, my workplace journey, I quit my job on the day I was meant to start. I literally quit my corporate job on the day I was meant to start. My father cried as I called HR to tell them I'm not coming anymore. And believe me, after achieving the first degree, the second degree, where I was the inaugural student of the year at King's College London, then top 10 black student in the UK, to turn around and tell your parents, I'm going to quit this job because I can't read the emails, everything is coming at me thick and fast. The sensory overload was so intense. All the training was done on bright white backgrounds, which for those people who are dyslexic, we really struggle to read if you're doing your presentations and the background is bright white. For the record, just using an off-white background color makes a huge difference. That is how sometimes you can tell is where someone just withdraws. That's the first thing. So I sat in the first session and heard Zara explain that someone quit on the morning of. I'm sure that person would have been me. And I don't think as an organization and as fellow colleagues, you should put yourself under pressure to spot the signs of neurodivergence. In actual fact, it's not your place to do so. What should happen is, as an organization, a process is put in place that person can choose to go down that line and also has the choice to disclose, because I'm sure we'll talk about it later on, but it's an intersectional aspect of diversity. I come from a home with Nigerian parents. My parents are open-minded, but many minority ethnic communities don't want to hear labels and conditions when you're talking about their children or their loved ones, and it goes across different types of communities as well. So I would actually throw the question back at you and say, it's no one's job in this room to spot when someone is neurodivergent. Don't put yourself under that pressure. What needs to happen instead is a workplace culture that is safe for someone to be 100% you, as your director in charge of people said earlier this afternoon, allowing people to be 100% themselves, which will enable them to give you the very best. So in terms of, do you spot neurodivergence? No. Do you make accommodations that will serve neurodivergent people and your neurotypical audience at large? Yes.
I totally agree with that. And I think from my perspective, I didn't feel confident enough in the past to say that I had got dyspraxia, because I was like, oh, I'm going to feel, maybe they're not going to know how to help me, and it'll just be an awkward, dead conversation. And I'm just like, oh, that's embarrassing. But I also find as well, like, if people don't know how to support you, nothing really gets done. And I think what I would have loved, and I guess you're right, actually, you don't necessarily need to ask someone, or there doesn't need to be a very transactional conversation of, oh, I'm neurodivergent, but I think it would be so good if at work we were just a bit more mindful of people think, you know, they work differently, and you don't need to ask them why they work differently, but you need to think, okay, I can see they react well in that situation and they struggle in another, and try and encourage whatever works for them best. And then if they choose to have that conversation with you and say, oh, I've got dyslexia, I've got dyspraxia, then that's totally up to them. But I think you're right, but I think it's good. I think these conversations are important, because you might come away today thinking, oh, I know someone who works better in that situation. They really struggle when they do that. Maybe they just work differently, whether they're neurodivergent or not. So I think that awareness and I think compassion is actually really important. Theo, what about you?
I guess just on that point, we have to come back a bit and think around kind of the evolution of the human brain, right? The modern brain that we have is like 200,000 years of evolution, right? So when we think about that, you know, the brain has spent all this time getting used to the environment that we live in, the world that we live in. And then all of a sudden, probably in the last 300 years, we've had globalization, we've had digital transformation, we have, you know, different types of light, sounds, buildings, environments, and yet we've only had 300 years for the human brain to evolve to those types of environments and to adapt to them. And then think about the last 50 years and the types of changes that we've got. There's a fish called the Mexican blind cave fish, and it took tens of thousands of years for it to lose its eyesight to become competitive in its environment, right? It became competitive because it needed to sustain energy, and because it couldn't see, it lost its eyesight over a period of time to become more competitive. Now, when we consider that evolution and the way that it impacts our human minds and the world around us, it's easy for us to assume that because somebody may have less brain cells, or may not like lights, or may have trouble with sound, or may not like to work in groups, that the problem is with them and that they have an issue and that they may be less than. The challenge that we've got is most of us truly don't understand our human brains and why they work. And therefore, when we expect people to tell us, I really struggle, and this is the reason why I struggle, I really find this difficult, what we're actually talking about is for them to explain the human brain. And how many of us can actually do that? Very few indeed. And that's why we have to kind of take a step back and not ask people to be able to have this kind of level of intellect around the makeup of their body and their human brain. And we need to think of it much more simply around how this environment, how these lights, how these new things that we're developing impacts them, and how it's enabling them and disabling them. And that's really important, because not all of us benefit from being able to have the label or the many labels that people require from us to show who we are, how we like to work, and how we're going to be productive in a real working environment that is changing by the second. And then we add in intersectionality and right? And I think that's the reality of where we are. We put too much weight and expectation on others, and especially if I think of my generation not getting the diagnosis till much later and learning through the lens of my daughter, there are so many people who really are not privileged for many, many reasons to ever have the labels, and therefore they're never going to be in a position to show up and say, hey, manager, I need help with this, and this is why. So I think it's really important we consider that when we consider neurodiversity within the workplace.
Yeah, do you know what? I was smiling when you were midway through that there, because I didn't get diagnosed with dyspraxia till I was 19, and that was at university. And I'm going to tell you a secret. I got my diagnosis because I got a mate on my course, right, and she'd got dyslexia. And she says, oh, if you go to the disability department, dyslexia and disability department, and you get diagnosis through uni, you get a free laptop. And I was like, do you know what? I didn't do it on a whim. I knew that I was different. And I was like, do you know what? I'm going to do it, because I could really do with a laptop, to be honest, right? And I went for it, and I did all these tests, whatever, and I was like, this is weird, weirdest test I've ever done. And they were like, oh, you've got something called dyspraxia. And I was like, hey, I'd never heard of it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So then I Googled it, as you do, first thing I did, and I was like, oh my God, this is me. And that's when my journey of understanding, like, it made me a bit emotional, actually, because it was like when you're in a kid, because obviously, as you mentioned earlier, Jenny, it kind of shows itself differently in different environments that expect different things from you. And like when I was a kid, I couldn't skip, I couldn't plait, I couldn't do roly-polies, I couldn't do all that all girls did. So I felt so left out as a kid, and I was like, I just look at like, how are you doing that? I don't understand. Anyway, and when I got diagnosed, I was like, oh my God, all these things that I didn't even realise were connected to me having dyspraxia. And it was like, it was so weird, and it was so revelationary, because I was like, do you know what? You were so hard on yourself because you couldn't do all these things as a kid. And it was just because you got dyspraxia, but you beat yourself up so much because you're like, I'm not normal, I can't fit, what's wrong with me? You know, and it was quite emotional, actually. I was like, wow, I was really horrible to myself. So one thing through me being diagnosed, it's made me a lot kinder to myself and a lot better with others, actually, because I'm like way more compassionate now. So that really made me smile when you brought that up. So thank you.
But you've brought up a really important point on the issue, on the topic of diagnosis. And I think if we're talking about neurodiversity in a business, of which, whether people like it or not, the BBC is a business, and they need to think of what they're investing in and what the return is going to be. I think as an organization, you do need to think about, are we going to offer our employees the opportunity to go for a diagnosis? How important is diagnosis in your neuro-inclusive culture? You could be an organization that accepts people self-diagnosing. That comes with pros and cons. You could be an organization that says, nope, we're ready to give the support, but that comes with you having a diagnosis, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is and help you with the cost of that. Because when we're looking at just a dyslexia diagnostic assessment, for children, the average cost now is around about £700 or £800, and for adults, it goes into the thousands. The average family has £252 after they've paid all their bills, bought food. Where are they going to get thousands of pounds to then do a diagnostic assessment, which allows them to access workplace arrangements and needs so that they can give you the best version of themselves? So that's something that, this is the chief operating group in the room. You guys are in charge of operations across various different departments at this organization. It's something that really needs to be thought about. My opinion on the matter, I am a big believer in choice. So you had the choice to go and get diagnosed. I was very privileged and went to a school that noticed within the first 3 weeks of me not coming to any class on time, in fact, being in year 7 and sitting in the back of year 13 physics for 30 minutes because I couldn't read a map. I still can't read a map, and didn't realize that I was in the wrong place at the right time. You know, they realized all these types of things, and they paid for me to get diagnosed. My parents could never have afforded it. The background I come from, it just wasn't even an option. They knew that there was a problem. They gave me the best support that they could, but they just didn't have the money to kind of go along that process. As an organization, where do you sit on that? My opinion is that choice. Give your employees the choice to get diagnosed if they want to. Give your employees and empower them to feel like they can self-diagnose. Now, you know, if someone comes late to work, that's not ADHD. That's something that we just need to clear up. Because when I say self-diagnose, I'm not saying you then allow for poor performance. That's not acceptable. And, you know, you've got your processes and policies for that. But where you see a pattern of various different things, so for example, dyslexic people tend to, not always, because everyone's neurodivergence is different, dyslexic people tend to be incredibly orally. You want to argue with me? You're going to lose, period. But on paper, we struggle. However, that was not the case for me. I was very fortunate to be quite good at both. I had the English scholarship in my sixth form study, and I'm very good orally. So it just depends. I think as an organization on the topic of diagnosis and in a business setting, definitely one for discussions when you have your meetings and hopefully when we're networking later on.
And also, just before I forget, because this is another thing with dyspraxia, I've got a very bad short-term memory. So, like Dory, when I went to see Dory, the second one, Finding Dory, I literally cried because, like, oh my God, that fish is me. Like, she just kept forgetting everything, and her parents were like, is that going to be me one day? So when I remember something, I've got to say it. So you were saying earlier about having the conversation about having a diagnosis and it not been on the responsibility, not been on the person to say, oh, I've got dyspraxia and this is what this means. Because if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't even fully know what it means. I'm not a scientist. I can only tell you what my experience is and how it affects me. And I think, and I totally get why this happens. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but if you go to a colleague or anybody and say, oh, I've got dyslexia, and they're like, okay, so they basically want you to be the professor of dyslexia and explain what all that means and what your needs are. And it's like, well, I don't know what my needs are. I was hoping you could help me with that. I've had that. I've gone to employees and I'm like, I've just let you know, I've got dyspraxia and I'm telling you because it might look like this and I don't want you to think it's X, Y, Z. And like, so what do you want from us? I'm like, I actually don't know. So I think that's where the work needs to come in, I feel like, because it's...
I absolutely disagree with some of the things that you're saying. I mean, I want to be a little bit more cynical about this because one of the issues, I think, is that we need to have more of a historical perspective on neurodiversity as a concept. And what some of the studies that we've done and lots of other people have done have looked at the increase in diagnosis over time. So if we take autism, for example, we did a study back in 22, which is only a year ago, right, that showed that diagnosis, especially in adults, has increased by 800% over the last 20 years. It's absolutely shot up. So I think we need to think about when people identify with a certain condition, often those conditions are actually very heterogeneous. So that, for example, autism includes people who have difficulty dressing, they have difficulty feeding themselves, but it also includes people with PhDs who live independently, people like Chris Packham who are incredibly successful. And it's an incredibly wide range of people. And actually what we've seen from studies is that the range of symptoms of autism, which is a very medicalized language as well, is actually expanding, and you need less severe symptoms as time passes to get a diagnosis. And the reason for that is because there's an enormous amount of interest in that particular category in the media. We see stuff about it all the time. And in neurodiversity more generally, more and more people are pushing for a diagnosis, especially in adulthood. So there is a feedback loop going on here. It's not like, oh, I have this or I don't have this. All these things are psychiatric constructs, and we put the boundaries around them as humans. So it's not like they're kind of a priori things that exist. There are neurological differences, and people definitely have difficulties and challenges. But where we put the boundaries around those things and calling them different things is our work that we do. And what happens is they get very reified by people that have these diagnostic assessments, and then suddenly, I have this, and that sort of then becomes a kind of master narrative about somebody's life. And that's the problem. As well as being a brilliant thing that you can use to kind of explain yourself, and actually it really improves family functioning. For something like dementia, for example, to know somebody has that diagnosis is brilliant for the family, because they then don't get angry with the person because they're forgetting everything or whatever it is. So it's really, really helpful, but it also is a hindrance as well. It can be very stigmatizing, and it also becomes this kind of master narrative about somebody's life that is a lens that everybody uses to interpret that person's life. So I want to be a little bit more of a step back, and let's think historically as well about how these things are discussed, and not just, oh, this is I have this. Yep. It's also about how has that evolved through time, And we need to be a little bit cynical, I think, when we're talking about diagnostic categories.
And I think the co-occurrence obviously has a huge impact. Our greater understanding now that if you are ADHD, you're probably more likely to be autistic, vice versa, and then how that manifests itself and shows itself in terms of strengths and challenges can be diverse. As you mentioned, therefore, it can be complex. Therefore, the biggest kind of eye-opener for me is that I first was diagnosed with dyslexia at 21, bombed out of school, college, finally found myself at university as a mature student because I could get in because I didn't need the qualifications. So I had the energy and enthusiasm, but not the academic qualifications to be able to do it. It was much later, in my late 30s, through the lens of my daughter, that I recognized the autism and ADHD. Now, what I would say, though, is the labels, right, are enforced upon us because, for me, we went through a 4-year process to get the autism and ADHD diagnosis for my daughter, and you need to be an English academic to fill out all the forms and to advocate for your child, which is obviously a challenge depending on your socioeconomic background and which language you speak as a first language. There's a problem there immediately. But then you get it purely to advocate and get the support of your child. And then being a girl, and depending on your background and what have you, and whether or not you want to bring that to your community, which you may not. So all of these levels of complexity, but we've been forced down the route of labels because it's a protected characteristic under the Disability Act, and therefore, because of the marginalisation and being negatively impacted through systems and processes, we're having to lean into those labels to enforce the support that we require for ourselves and for our children that we feel we may not have been given. And that, for me, I'd rather not have the labels, but in reality, I have to have the labels to be able to advocate for my child and for myself in certain instances. And that's kind of in the strange place that we exist at the moment, where it's, you know, you can't have the one without the other. And then because there's not enough evidence and research, and from those who are ND in the community, not enough research has been done yet, we're not able to evidence it enough in terms of that co-occurrence, gender, the impact more broadly. We're just starting to get there now. So I think it's really important to understand that, and that's why enabling people to have the conversation without the label is really, really important.
It comes back to that point, though, in the sense that as an organisation, you have to choose, are you going to focus on diagnosis, or are you going to focus on people self-diagnosing? I have worked with organisations that say, do you know what, we're going to allow people to self-diagnose, and they've put policies and processes in place. I think Professor Ginny is right that we have to be a bit cynical about diagnosis. I'm very open about the fact that, yes, being dyslexic has given me so many gifts, superpowers, however people want to put it, but it's also the bane of my life. I have had anxiety that is crippling because I am dyslexic, and I will tell you how and why that happens. I have a slower working memory. That's just a scientific term for how and the way in which one person works. So it takes me a bit longer to do things. If the BBC did not give me the support they have given me today, believe me, who knows whether I would be sitting here. But this is what it looks like in reality. I would get up at 5 a.m., knowing that I have to be here, let's just say at 1 o'clock. I live an hour and a half away from this particular location. But because I know I've got to battle with the anxiety, battle with packing all my stuff on time, battle with reading the instructions, I can't read a map, so muscle memory and just using whatever is around me to get from point A to B. This is all because of my dyslexia. I'm then emotionally drained. I need to come on stage and have really positive energy so that you can all listen to me. It's been a long day for you. You probably had like 3 or 4 coffees to stay awake. So you're very, it's dependent on me bringing good vibes and engaging you with what I'm saying. At that point, would you say that dyslexia is a superpower? Would I then also have to battle with the fact that I can't really eat much because my anxiety is now giving me IBS, and TMI, I'm so sorry, but anything I eat will go straight through me. Even down to things like, can I wear white trousers? Will there be an incident? That's how much it impacts someone. So I think Professor Ginny is right in the sense that yes, again, the topic of diagnosis as an organization, you've got to think about what direction you want to go in, but you've got to try your hardest to have what I believe is a balanced approach to neurodivergence. I'm sure Xanthi has got some real examples of things she's had to juggle with and the way she's had to mask her neurodivergence in order to bring her best self to work.
Yeah, and also just going back to your point, I get it, and I think this is really annoying actually, because there is no one definite answer. I personally don't think, because as I said earlier, when I got my diagnosis, I honestly was so relieved because I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense now. I can stop beating myself up, because I would never say the things that I said to myself to anybody here, to anyone. I'd never be like, you're rubbish, you can't do that, you're never going to be this. But that's what I mean, I think we all could be very self-critical. We're all our own worst critic, but I think from my experience, being neurodivergent definitely made me feel different, and probably other reasons as well. Like, we'll get onto intersectionality, but the diagnosis for me was really helpful, and it helped me, like I said earlier, be more compassionate. But I understand also how having a label can actually be quite toxic, and I think it's. So I guess my question is then, what's the middle ground there? Because I personally found it helpful. However, I can totally understand why it's not, and the judgment that comes with having a label. So in terms of the workplace, in terms of people here as bosses thinking, well, what do I do then? I can't win here. I don't know whether to, do you want a label? Do you not want a label? How do I make this, how does this work? So I don't know, who wants to take that? Who thinks how we can kind of meet in the middle there?
I agree with you about that. In a structural sense, what organisations can do is have some kind of auditing process where people can be reflexive about what makes them, when are they in the flow of work? When are you in that zone where you feel that you're able to be creative and achieve things and work as your best possible self, as you put it. And I think if people can be more if there's a kind of mechanism for that audit, it doesn't necessarily have to be through a diagnostic route, but it could be something like, oh, well, I don't like mixing and small talk, and I'm very uncomfortable when there's the coffee break. I like the structure of an agenda and a meeting, or something like that. If somebody can identify those kinds of things about themselves, and there's a mechanism when they come into an organisation to enable them to do that, then that's kind of becomes common knowledge. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I've got this or I've got that, but I just work best in this sort of way. One of the studies that we did was around, we were thinking about strengths of autism, and the kinds of things that people reported were things like having amazing memories, being able to focus for long periods of time. But what we found that was really interesting was that those things that were strengths were also, in different situations, were actually hindering them. So, for example, there was a guy who was a gardener who was great at routines, and he was very good if he was given this structured routine, but he couldn't break out of it. So he found that extremely useful in terms of seasons and things that, he was an amazing gardener, but then he had real problems if like his boss said, no, you have to take a break now, and something different happened. There was a problem that meant that he couldn't stick to that routine. So it's kind of like, what can be really, really helpful in one situation might not be so helpful in another. You might have a characteristic, like, for example, you're very sensitive to sound and to visual stimuli that might make you have an amazing visual sensibility. You might be a great artist, but then if you're in a crowded restaurant with lots of sounds bombarding you, you might really struggle. So I think we need to get away from this polarity talk as well of okay, this person's good at this and they're bad at that. But it's kind of about the context that you're in, and trying to make that context a place where somebody can thrive for what works for them, and get into that flow,
I also think, just touching on that point you just made there, that having, when you think of any diagnosis, you think of, with neurodiversity, for example, you kind of see strengths and weaknesses in your head, because that's what you tend to see online if you Google it, and I actually think that's really unhelpful. Going on what you just said there as well, it's not actually helpful, is it? Like, good communicator, or like I think I can talk quite well to people, but I've got a really bad memory, and it's like it feels quite divisive, and probably isn't actually that helpful to people. And again, that kind of fuels those labels a little bit. Do you think?
Yeah, one of the challenges that we've got is the old models for understanding our strengths and weaknesses and challenges, however you want to define it. And we allow other people to kind of impose them upon us. So, the way I define it is, it's like people are surrounding us with kryptonite, right? And the kryptonite has a negative impact on us, right? It doesn't allow us to be our best selves. And other people keep telling us that we should be okay with this because everybody else is. It's fine. You know, everybody else is able to write on the board. Why can't you? Well, because I've never been able to write properly with a pen, because I can't spell, because I get embarrassed. Yes, I can advise boards, but no, if you ask me to write on a board, I'm immediately going to go back to that child in the classroom that can't write and is embarrassed, right? So it's those kind of ideas and concepts that we miss out on because we start to believe what other people have told us about how we should be. That we look confident, therefore we're confident. But there is a cost to being confident. There's a cost to coming up and doing this. And that maybe at the end of the day, we need to go in a darkened room and be quiet. But what if we don't get the opportunity to do that? How will that impact on ourselves, our mental health, our well-being, our ability to perform? And I think what happens in the end is you believe the rhetoric so much, you start to feed yourself the kryptonite, right? And I've noticed this, not just around the work practices, the way that you work within an environment, within a team, but then a manager may change, right? And they don't understand the nuances. Or your environment may change, or the business strategy changes, right? So all of a sudden, your strength is continued, but the rules have changed. And if your strength and the rules have changed, all of a sudden it becomes your challenge. And people are like, you were great at talking before. Why are you so rubbish at it now? And what we need to understand, we need to empower people to be able to sit back and really, truly understand what their strengths and challenges are and the overlapping points, the intersections of strengths and challenges, because one can push the other over, and to the point, sometimes they can be the same thing. And that's where the level of complexity comes, especially if I think of my age range and experience. It's been a long time of me accepting what people have told me about myself, that it's very confusing. And I don't really know who I am anymore, right? Until the point that I refuse to spoon-feed myself kryptonite anymore. And I think that is the most empowering gift I can give to people, and they can give that to their children, is to stop spoon-feeding them and yourself this stuff that is bad for you. It hurts you, it harms you. And we need to take a step back and fully understand the connections between those strengths and challenges and how one can impact the other both positively and negatively.
I think that's a really good point, and I think, Onyinye, I'm going to come to you for this. So in terms of in the workplace, how do we bring what you've just said, Theo, into practical terms? How do we actually make a difference? Because we're having this conversation now. It's very complicated. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of nuance. But in order for people to actually make that change and implement something that's going to work, as some sort of strategy to start those conversations in the workplace without people feeling the need to come in and say, oh, I've got dyslexia, I've got ADHD, because we don't always want people to feel pressured to do that. How do we do that? From a consultant perspective, how would you advise people to implement something
How long
like
have we got? No, I'm joking. I think the first thing as an organisation, specifically to the BBC and from what I know, is give everybody the opportunity to access some form of education on this topic. So, and that goes beyond celebrating Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which is in March and is quite literally like 5 days. We can do better than that. At the same time, I'm not saying bombard everyone and make everyone do it every single month, but you guys have got a diversity and inclusion calendar, which is incredible. Have a look at where else you could put in awareness training. This awareness training does not have to take up the whole day. It could be a lunch and learn. It could be 10 minutes. It could be kind of self-paced education on your internal network that people, it is a requirement that at some point they need to go through those slides or watch those videos in whichever format that works best for your division within the BBC. Neurodiversity education, neurodiversity awareness is a must. That's the first tick. The second tick is Enigma. I understand that you've got, 500 members already, or 500 people taking part? That's a huge number of people engaging in a network. Empower that network and give them resources. It's all fine and good signing off the network, but that's when the hard work begins. So pat yourselves on the back for making it that far, but this is actually now where you're going to start climbing that mountain. When I say give them resources, if diagnosis is just far too complicated for you to get into, at least allow that network to partner with organizations that can enable your employees to go for work needs assessments. So you're playing to the strengths and weaknesses, I hate to use those terms, of the individual that enables them to bring their best self to work. And it allows your managers, which brings you on to the third thing that organizations can do, which is specific training for those in management roles. They don't just need to know, oh, this is dyslexia, or this is autism, or Tourette's. Managers need to know how best to manage those people. Now, Professor Ginny came onto a really key point that I must stress. Everyone's neurodivergence is different. So there is no textbook. I cannot sit here honestly and professionally say to you, everybody with dyslexia should be treated like this, everybody with ADHD should be treated like that. But there are guidelines, and there will be trial and error, and you need to be forgiving to yourself and make it very aware that this is the first time that you're doing this, and people should, give you the space to make mistakes and give you some grace. That's really important. But specific managerial training on how to work best with neurodivergent people, as well as managing them in a team that is going to be majority neurotypical. So it's not just about managing that neurodivergent person, because I don't know about you, Xanthi, I hate being made to feel special. I was ridiculously bullied at secondary school because I was taken out of class, and I read on yellow paper. So the whole school knew I was dyslexic. I was the only one with yellow paper. It was just, it was a horrendous time. But I hate being made to feel different, special, challenged, all those not so good words that we use to describe neurodivergent people. Try and learn how to bring that neurodivergent person and make them feel part of the team, not like the green apple in the bowl of red apples. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You made a really good point there about feeling different. You see, I didn't really feel that different. In my head I did, but I don't think I was ever treated differently, because you mentioned this earlier, which I think is a really good point, is I tend to find, for people that I've spoken to who are neurodiverse, are very good at masking, which basically means we hide it as best we possibly can. And usually that means withdrawing yourself, well, for me anyway, and I know I think one of us mentioned the word withdraw earlier, withdraw ourselves from situations in which the traits, symptoms, whatever word you want to use, of our neurodiversity tend to show up the most. So in those situations, I'm like, nah, I'm not doing it. So as I said earlier, I couldn't skip, I couldn't plat. So I would avoid any situation where anyone could possibly invite me to plat as a kid. I mean, when you're a kid, it seems like actually it's quite a small thing, but when you're a kid, learning how to plat is really important, You can't fit in with the girls if you can't plat the hair. So, but as an adult, on a more serious note, work is the biggest one for me, certainly. And you're like, it's going to make me look bad if I'm in this situation and I can't perform to the standard in which I'm supposed to. So I think masking's a really interesting point. Has that been something that you've had to deal with? And I mean, I know you said you felt different, but I guess in other situations you've tried your best maybe to just not show someone that part of you that you're a bit insecure about, maybe.
I have to tell myself not to mask, because what is the point? And actually today was a really good example. Candice was really kind, said, how are you going to get to this location? I was going to say, I'll get the train like everyone else. And then the other voice in my head said, then you'll get up at 4 a.m., miss the train, not find the building, come late, sweating, IBS, hungry because you've not eaten. And I just said, is there any chance that someone could just come and get me? And I don't mean to sound spoiled or like a princess, but it just makes it so much better. Hopefully I have given you an education on this topic, and I've given you my best self today. You will leave here with something from me, as opposed to me coming in like a mess, not really engaged because I'm drained from having to battle with my dyslexia. That's something that I'm still learning to do till date. You grow up in a neurotypical world, which means your default setting is to mask, and it takes time and an education. You have to learn how to unmask, and I'm slowly learning to do that. So I'm still doing it, but I'm also telling myself not to do it so that I can be an example for others and empower others to believe that they don't have to do it either.
I love that, and it's an amazing, it's a responsibility that you've kind of chosen by allowing yourself to not mask. And you don't have to do that, but you are doing that, so I think that's brilliant.
But
Theo,
can I
is-
just say we're
go
putting
for
a
it.
lot of the masking I mean, what you're talking about when you're talking about masking is performing
Yeah.
at
yeah.
work, right? So that you're passing, if you like, as normal. Neurotypical is a word I don't like, but that's basically what you mean. So I think everybody does that when they go to work. They're in a public space. They're performing
Yeah.
to some extent.
It's a version of you that you want to show. Yeah.
But when we've talked to neurodivergent individuals, they've said it's the effort required that they're having to lift your game so much, and then afterwards you're kind of crawling into a ball because of the energy that requires. So it's difficult. It's a difficult one because again, masking is kind of something that everybody does. It's a performance. So Goffman, who's a really famous sociologist, talked about front stage and backstage personas. And the front stage is when people go to work, they're in a public space, they're actually performing, and they're kind of appearing confident, and they're projecting an image that they want other people to interpret. Whereas the backstage is when they're on their own in private, perhaps they're, feeling more vulnerable. And what he talked about was how there isn't one of those that's more authentic than the other, because everybody does this. Everybody has, to some extent, performance in their repertoire of skills. So I think it's a really fascinating area. But what we learned when we did the study with neurodivergent individuals was it was the energy required to lift your game that's the really difficult thing. So that, there's in the backstage region, if you like, there's a kind of crawling up into a ball and really suffering and kind of having to recovery.
I can relate to that. There's times where I'm like, oh my God, I need to just be in a dark room. I've done too much today. I can't cope. I feel like we all feel like that at times, but I feel like it's a bit more draining when you feel like you have to perform.
In terms of like the institution, say
Yeah.
the BBC or the employer or whatever, then what we need is a kinder place where you don't have to perform so much. You don't have to kind of look right. You don't have to act exactly right, in every situation.
Yeah.
It's where it's more forgiving of kind of oddness and deviance.
Do you know what? Yeah, and I feel like the whole point of what we've said today, and I kind of mentioned it at the start, I think compassion is, for me, the best thing you can do for your colleagues. And it doesn't necessarily, and this transcends this conversation. I think just in general, I think if we're all a bit more compassionate of why people were different, whatever that looks like, I just think it would change a lot, and we'd have more conversations. And well, we've only got a few short minutes left, and I wanted to just see if anyone had got any questions before we wrap up. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? Any thoughts? No pressure. Yeah, go for it. Got a mic on the way to you.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Aaron. I am a software engineering team lead, and I am dyslexic. So you were talking, one interesting point you kept bouncing around between was because of talking about the labels and different types of neurodiversity, but also talking about the breadth of the needs under those different labels, treating people as individuals and accessing reasonable adjustments. So one of the challenges that keeps coming up in conversations is about, you don't get asked what your neurodivergence is, you get asked what are the reasonable adjustments you need, but you don't necessarily know what those reasonable adjustments are for the context. It's very difficult to say, hey, I'm dyslexic, and get that two-way conversation for the other side saying, hey, here's some adjustments we've done before, or understanding of what this might mean. So what would you suggest in terms of improving that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be an iterative process, so that it's, you're absolutely right, it's about context, and then reviewing that maybe once every year, or whenever the person perhaps themselves calls that out. But it definitely needs to be an iterative process, because like you say, you're not going to know what the reasonable adjustments that you need are until you've been in that situation for some time. You can't just come into a new situation and say, oh, I need this, that, and the other. You need to work there and be there and get that routine established before you know, okay, this works, this doesn't. So it needs to be a review process, not just like a one-off when somebody starts. In fact, when somebody starts, it's probably the worst time to ask them what reasonable adjustments they need.
The worst time ever. Don't ask someone like they tried to do to me in a different organization, on the day before, what are your reasonable adjustments? Well, it depends on the situation and depends on what I'm doing at this place. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 11, and what happens is you do that big diagnosis assessment, and it's really long-winded for neurodivergent people. It's quite ironic that it's so long. But after that, you continuously, well, if you're doing it properly, you are continuously meant to do work, like a needs assessment. So I did it again at 16. I did it again at 18, and I'm going to be 25 this year, and I'm just about to do it again because things have changed. And let me tell you now, dyslexia as a child and dyslexia as an adult, I actually have to show up to this meeting on time. I actually cannot get lost. That deadline needs to be met. You know, at school, you can push it. You can ask your teacher, Miss, can I have another week? At university, can I have extenuating circumstances? The workplace, if I'm, you know, a commissioner here or a producer, the TV show needs to be ready for BBC Two on the 8th. The public is waiting. It's already been published. We can't change this deadline for you, so the needs have changed, if that makes sense. So definitely think as an organization to support your neurodivergent colleagues, consider continuous workplace needs assessments. And obviously that's a choice. You can't force someone's hand, but if the option is available, it will help a lot.
Have we got one last question? We've got literally 1 minute. Very tight. We'll keep this one. Sorry.
Hi, my name's Oliver. I work on BBC iPlayer. My question, I suppose, pertains to what you were saying earlier, Theo, about changing environments over the last decades. My question more centred around the last few years. There's obviously been an enormous shift into remote working and hybrid working. And I'm interested to know your thoughts on what the impact of that would be or what your observations have been on the neurodivergent community. And I suppose I should condition that by saying that I understand everybody's needs are different, but my question is more in general terms. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's, I guess there are some people who, through that process of COVID, really struggled with being at home. A lot of people, specifically, there were a lot of people who identify with the label ADHD who like to be around people, the energy, and therefore not being in an environment had a significant impact on their mental health and well-being. And there's other people who were able to be much more productive as we went into the new way of working, which is basically if you're empowered to make your home environment accessible, it's already part accessible because it's your home environment, right? You've already made sure the light's set to a standard that you appreciate, and that, I mean, there's certain things you can't control, right? But ultimately, that environment is much better for you, and you can decide not to spend time with other people, and you can have a nap at whatever time if that's going to help you be more productive. So we've definitely seen a massive increase in engagement, in performance, from a group of people who perhaps felt marginalised and system impacted within very busy environments with glass walls, where they had a limited choice, that were organisations that were deemed to be very diverse in nature, but actually people were still forced to come into a work environment every day that ultimately we realised they didn't have to. Now, what we're seeing is this kind of return to what does the future of the modern workplace and workforce look like. And unfortunately, there are definitely trends to show people are being driven back into the workplace, even though it potentially is going to have a negative impact on their new way of performance and working. So we're yet to see all the data to really understand how this will play out. But I think we have seen better inclusion for people who perhaps would have been struggling in some of those environments, but they now potentially will be brought back into the workplace. It's a complicated one, and one that, dependent on who you're talking to, whether it's the leading of a global organisation that wants people to come back into the workplace and into the city centre and what have you, and a community who feel that they've been performing better, their mental health and well-being has been significantly improved. And we can look at that within the education system as well. Those children who were better equipped to be able to deliver within that educational environment, to those like my daughter that really struggled without the routine of going in and without the social interaction and without the reality that I can't keep a busy brain busy, and that I academically struggle as well. So, I mean, there's all these nuances that can come into play. But I think, ideally, we would give more flexibility to individuals to make choice where they can.
Theo, thank you so much for your answer, and that's about all we've got time for today, but thank you so much, and can I have a round of applause for these wonderful panellists? Thank you very much, and we'll now hand back to Sean.
Xanthi, and thank you so much. That was, wasn't that interesting? Wasn't that interesting? And what I take from this are the words from my old boss, and I would say friend, Katie Lloyd, the former development director at BBC News. And then one of the first things that she said to quite a lot of us is, whatever you do, don't try and become a BBC person, whatever that is.
I've heard that one before as well.
It's so it's so important, because you know what? If you're authentic, yeah, okay. You know what? I don't sit at home doing talks like this every night, only 3 nights of the week. But in reality, if you're your authentic self, you can't get caught out. Just remember, we all have imposter syndrome. We all think, I'm going to get caught one of these days, not being good enough. We have that. But round of applause for being yourselves and encouraging everybody to be.
Thank you.
In a short while, I'm going to do my own closing remarks. I'm just going to give it about 20 seconds notice to Lee and Chinny that will be coming to them quite shortly. I'm just going to say to everybody here that at some point, if you ever feel that you need support either with your own needs and requirements in terms of disability, you can approach BBC Access and Disability Services. If you need to speak to somebody, we're introducing the BBC Mental Health Peer Support Network, or some of us still have these turquoise mental health first aider badges. There's the Employee Assistance Programme. You can access that on Gateway on the intranet. And also, if you are a manager, the HR Manager Advice Portal is there. So I'll come back shortly. I'll just say to you, when that census comes out, it's important that the BBC knows how many people are here in this organisation. It's not about not being inclusive. It's about making sure we understand the pure scale and the responsibilities that we have as a public service broadcaster. So I'll be back with you in a little while, but we'll hear from Chinny in a moment. But closing remarks from Lee, please. Can you both come up on stage, actually? We'd love to be able to see you. I'd particularly like to be able to see you, darn it.
Thanks, Sean.
It's the second time I've done a blind joke. What do you call a blind journalist? A journalist. What's wrong with you?
So, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Sean, for a brilliant day, really brilliant day, and for your hosting of it and guiding us through it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody in the audience who've come to listen and spend the day with us, even if you've dropped in and out, and everybody on Zoom or on the streams who've listened to us. Thank you so much to all the amazing crew in this room for making this happen. All of the team who've supported us. Thank you, ladies, as well. Thank you so much. I have a few thoughts. But actually, my thoughts are so relevant given all the amazing, brilliant comments that have come out of the discussion and that fantastic panel. So a couple of thoughts I was left with and personal takeaways. I'll start with the we are all human. Sean, you made that point. We all want to be valued, listened to, heard, respected, empowered to be the best we can be. Every single one of us wants all of that, I think. We also don't have to know all the answers. I don't know is actually okay. And we heard a lot of that in that panel too, I thought was super interesting. You know, it's about how we solve problems together, how we solve some of these challenges together, the conversations, we work together, an iterative process between a manager and an employee, finding out what's the best way every single one of us can work in the environments we're in. It's all about learning, curiosity, being open to learning, asking questions, feeling safe to speak up and to do so, of course. And then I think I'll end with just what I said this morning. It's also about leadership. And leadership is every single one of us. It's not just somebody at the top of the organization. It's not just our line manager. Every single one of us has influence over somebody in any part of our lives. And how we choose to lead and show up in those environments, I think, is the most important thing. But it's been such an honor to have the conversations and to hear the stories and to be part of this discussion today. And I'm super looking forward to the conversations that we'll continue to have tomorrow. So thank you all very much.
Lee, thank you very much. And closing remarks from Chinny.
So just to echo a lot of what you said, Lee, today was absolutely incredible, and just a very, very big thank you to everybody for joining and attending. So tomorrow we've got our second day full of incredible events, so I'll kind of share some of them with you. We've got disability allies training in the morning. We've also got an unconscious bias session by Dumi Sender. I don't know if any of you were at the Birmingham session he did a few weeks ago, but it was absolutely incredible. I highly recommend it. We've also going to be meeting our BBC staff network. So we heard from Xanthi, who's part of Enigma, Neil, who's a floor manager today, is part of Embrace, done a great job. So it's great to just come along and learn about all the different staff networks. And I would also encourage you to get involved. The work that the teams are doing is absolutely incredible. So please do get involved. There's also going to be a session with Wisdom on the hackathon, closing the representation gap. Again, going to be a very, very interesting session. And last but not least, Caroline O'Reilly, who actually used to be a member of my team, is going to be talking about her transition journey. So again, another session I highly recommend. Now, that's what's happening. Now, I'm going to pass over to Jamie, but I know she won't do this for herself. So I just want everyone to give a really big round of applause for Jamie, who's worked tirelessly to bring today together. And she's going to say a very big thank you to everyone who's getting involved. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, gosh, where do I start? Well, thank you so much for the introduction. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jamie Nilimbachi, and I lead on diversity and inclusion for the EQ group with an amazing team of around 11, 12 delivery leads who are working on 11 initiatives to bring the EQ D&I plan to life. And it's sponsored by 3 of our leaders, so that's Kieran Clifton, Sarah Jones, and Joe Sherlock. So inclusion means business. This project has been going on for quite a few months, and helping me with this is Candice Stanton and Sana Nazir, and the help of the Central D&I team. And I can't quite comprehend how I feel towards the end of the day. I think we've lived and breathed this for so many months. And I just went into the gallery to play the role of a producer for the first time, and I was absolutely blown away by just listening to everyone who's come on stage to share their stories, and to become vulnerable in sharing them. From hearing personal stories to listening to our incredible Sean Dilley about how he navigates being blind. His great stories, his great wit. I'm absolutely in awe. From hearing Zara So challenging our leaders, and to business representatives to share the brilliant work that's been already taking place within the COO group, and to the brilliant session that we've just heard, focusing on the strengths of neurodiversity in the business. So it's I think in terms of this event, it's a corporate event, but it almost felt like it was something that we could all come together instead of it just being something that's sort of transactional. It felt like we could become a little bit closer, especially when we were listening to the leaders. I think it almost breaks down a perceived barrier that's there, where we almost think that leaders are too busy to talk to, or too important to sort of approach even. Chinny asked a question earlier during the first session. Has anyone ever felt excluded? And there were quite a lot of raised hands, and this is why this event is so important. This is why we're doing this. Inclusion means everybody, and I can't stress that enough. So my thanks. Firstly, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's come and gone, who were sat here in the audience. It's never fun presenting to an empty theatre, so thank you so much for coming. It still feels really surreal, but I do extend my heartfelt gratitude to the magicians that have made this event what it is, and I apologise in advance if I miss anybody. Thank you to Lee, to Chinny, to Azair. Thank you to both of you for sponsoring this event, for your support, your guidance, and advice. And our thanks to everyone who's come and shared their stories here today. Was there Zara, Professor Ginny, Theo, Oninye, and our very talented hosts, Xanthe, Ben, and of course, Sean Dilley. And to all our representatives who showcased all the impressive work. So it's Laura Ellis in R&D, Phil Robinson in product, Disha Singh in Butte, and Candy Stanton in QRA. A massive thank you to the fantastic Ben Thompson, who's the head of internal comms, for being my one-stop shop along with the internal comms team. No request was too big, and he's been an amazing sidekick. If you want things moving, Ben's your man. So cue the flurry of emails that are going to come through to him. Good luck, Ben. To my support network, to my mentor, to my leadership team, to those who have listened and advised, and the R&D team who have given their services. Again, no request was too big. The support from HR team, our Q group senior leaders who have been behind this each step of the way, and to Andrew Young, Fiona McLeod, and the Central D&I team who have helped keep this on track. A special mention goes to Joseph Turner, our fabulous graphic designer who's been borrowed by the R&D team, along with Sarah Mines and Laura Ellis, who have helped bring this together. So thank you to those. To Mark Diamond, who's in charge of the radio theatre, for working with us to create our vision and listening to our bonkers requests. And a thank you to the crew here and to the gallery team up top. The attention to detail has just been out of this world, so thank you so much. Our volunteers who have helped to ask to be a part of this session, thank you so much. And to the quietest on stage, our BSL interpreters, Irmina and Natasha. It's turning into a BAFTA speech, this is, I'm really sorry. And lastly, but by no means least at all, the two delivery leads who have worked on this relentlessly, Candy Stanton and Sana Nazir, without whom this would never have taken place at all. So just a massive round of applause for both of them, please. And just again, thank you so much for coming, and I'm going to hand you back to the brilliant Sean.
Just briefly, I have to say, I don't want to be the one who stands in between you and the glasses of wine, all right?
Yes.
But it's all right, the glasses are out there, so I'm okay for a moment. Look, I'm going to be quite brief. I won't repeat all the thank yous, but I wholeheartedly thank everybody, Jamie and the team, for putting today together. It's an enormous privilege to get the opportunity to sometimes be the face of inclusion and diversity, even if you're sort of pushing at the bit as far as the public-facing bit of the organisation goes. But I deeply believe in my heart that what we do as public servants, and even if we have colleagues working in studios, you're still ultimately benefiting public service, is enormous. The primary object of an efficient BBC is service of the public to the communities to which we all belong. We are our neighbours, our mothers and our fathers. Everyone here, beyond, globally, who knows, extraterrestrially, let's not start that theory, is one condition or accident away from disability or further disability. And today, everyone in this room demonstrated that we have one really strong thing in common, and it is that we are all different, and that's okay. I'm going to ask you to do something for me. I'm going to tell you just lastly, in terms of the theory of storytelling, and I'm going to ask you to do something for yourself and the BBC. Later today, have a look at the back of your BBC Pass. The sticker that they sent out during the pandemic's fallen off, so it's a couple of words different, but read the values. The BBC has really good values. Believe them. When you act in good faith, honesty, integrity, transparency, inclusivity and diversity, the BBC will back you to the hilt, because it's an organisation that believes in bringing yourself to work, okay? So you'll be pleased to know the summing up for me comes like this. Stories, I can't emphasise this enough. Stories are how we learn. Stories are things you'll remember for your entire life. I can give you 20,000 statistics. We can talk targets and minimums. But if I tell you my story, you'll remember that for a lifetime. Promise you will. Promise you will. And there's some Harvard University research, don't worry, we have no PowerPoints, I promise, that shows, because everybody would have felt that emotional feeling, good, bad, or indifferent today, to some of the wonderful stories that we've heard. Harvard research shows that you're 7 times more likely to act upon something rather than letting that fizzle away as a thought. And I want you to think about this ahead of day 2, which is an online exclusive session tomorrow. if you highlight one thing that you're asking your audiences to do online and here in the radio theatre. So are you ready? Because I'm going to ask you to do something now. Between now and tomorrow, please think of one thing. Whatever your role is within the BBC, right? Think of one thing you can do. One thing to make it a genuinely more inclusive organisation. Don't worry about platitudes, because talk is cheap. One thing that you can do. One thing that you can do. Maybe it's like in meetings you'll have an option so that people can kind of submit thoughts by email afterwards. Whatever it is. And even if you can't think of anything immediately, that one commitment really just needs to be, I'll have a think of that over the next week. Would you all do that for us? Can we have a yes if we're going to? Yes. Right, quite a few of you are saying no, I'll come and see you later. Right, no, seriously though, can I just say a massive thank you. Thank you very much to everybody here. One last round of applause, and we'll certainly share a networking drink in the Media Cafe. Inclusivity and business is just what we do. Thank you very much.